Cave diving has claimed a significant number of lives, especially when individuals venture into the dangerous depths of underwater caves. Cave exploration is challenging on its own, but cave diving takes those risks to another level. The situation becomes even more perilous under extreme conditions, like those faced by a group of 5 men who ventured into an underwater ice cave, spanning over 400 meters. Unfortunately, only 3 of them emerged from the cave alive, while the other 2 did not survive. A GoPro camera mounted on one of the divers captured their harrowing dive, providing an in-depth understanding of the terrifying events that unfolded in the depths. The footage revealed the worst possible scenario, as the divers faced unbearable discomfort and stress. Tragically, 2 divers lost their lives. This is the chilling account of the Plura Cave disaster. 5 men of Finnish nationality, namely Kai Kankkonen, Patrik Grönqvist, Jari Huotarinen, Vesa Rantanen, and Jari Yu, set out to explore the dreaded Plura Cave. They had planned a rather dangerous exploration of this terrifying cave, which leads up to the Steinugel dry cave. Kai and Patrik had previously discovered the connection between the Plura Cave and the Stein dry cave. These 2 explorers, alongside another diver named Sami Pakarinen, had successfully completed a dive from the dry cave's entrance to the Plura Cave opening, which they called a traverse. Given their previous accomplishment, they were confident they could pull it off again, but this time they planned to start from the other end. The cave's depths reach a staggering 426 feet, or approximately 130 meters, making it one of the longest water-filled caves in northern Europe. This cave presents numerous challenges, such as low visibility and confusing cave patterns. On February 6, 2014, in Rana, Norway, these men began their ill-fated dive. The 5 men were traveling in Jari Huotarinen's van, which was towing a truck stacked full of equipment. These men were set to explore the depths of this terrifying cave. The contents of the truck included a snowmobile, underwater scooters, tons of diving cylinders, and some other smaller tools. The divers were evidently skilled and had knowledge of what they were venturing into, as 2 of them had already made the traverse. It was a 15-hour drive as they made their way across Finland, Sweden, and Norway, analyzing and reviewing their plans bit by bit prior to reaching their destination. The dive was speculated to take only 5 hours if everything went according to plan. They decided to split into 2 teams once inside the cave to prevent and reduce sediments and ensure water clarity. They arrived at Rana and then rested at the Jorbru farm for the night, as they were exhausted from the long drive. Diving to depths exceeding over 130 feet is considered technical diving, and divers who wish to undergo this kind of expedition must have undergone special training, as specific qualifications are required. According to confirmed reports, each of these men were certified deep water divers and certified CCR, closed circuit rebreather, full cave divers, according to international standards. The qualifications these men possessed gave them the right to undertake such a dangerous dive. However, despite their qualifications, experience, and training, this challenging dive was soon to become the most terrifying nightmare they would experience. They got up in the morning, prepping for the dive. The temperature was below freezing at -3 degrees Celsius. To get to the cave entrance, the men needed to dive through the frozen Plura Lake, and they began sawing an entrance to grant them access to the cave. Kai, Vesa, and Jari Yu left for the entrance of Steinugel, the dry cave, to drop off some equipment. Meanwhile, Patrik used a chainsaw to open a triangular space on the frozen lake. Preparations were going very well despite the low temperature and the late start, and all things were going according to plan. In a short time, Patrik had already sawed through the ice, but by then, the other 3 hadn't returned from the Steinugel cave. Patrik then asked Huotarinen if they should wait for the others before diving in, but he signaled to Patrik that it was time to dive, and Patrik agreed. They made their way to the cave with their scooters and started to descend into the cave entrance. They used a CCR, a modern type of breathing system that doesn't discharge the already breathed air, but recycles it to allow diving times of over 17 hours. Another major piece of equipment that greatly aided the divers was the underwater scooters, which propelled them further into the water, helping to save and conserve their energy. As the pair continued to descend into the cave, reaching extreme depths, the risks exponentially increased as the temperature dropped drastically and the water pressure rose. These divers observed absolute caution, as the duo carried a third rebreather system as a reserve in case of a system failure. A tear in the diving suit at such depths would be fatal due to the frigid temperatures and high pressures, increasing the risk of hypercapnia or excessive carbon dioxide in the bloodstream. Hypercapnia can result from panicked breathing or when a diver breathes too quickly. The CCR rebreather, while highly efficient, can also be a double-edged sword and cause casualties if the system malfunctions and distributes carbon dioxide into the diver's bloodstream. Excess carbon dioxide could lead to confusion, fatigue, and ultimately, loss of consciousness. With the daylight fading little by little, the descent of Patrick and Hutarinen saw them descend to depths of 34 meters, covering a distance of over 500 feet. After a while, they reached another chamber that was over 250 meters long. This particular chamber is a part of an underwater cave known as an air chamber, as this region is partially filled with water and allows for air spaces that enable easy breathing, especially for novice divers. The cave was spacious enough to allow both divers to move freely up until this point. After they passed the air chamber, the duo continued their descent with their scooters still leading the way, reaching depths of 60, 100, and then 130 meters, which was the deepest part of the cave. At this point, they powered down their scooters so Hutarinen could take in the beauty of the cave depth. It was a sight to behold. They had both agreed on how they would switch to their third rebreather system, reducing any kind of risk they might face. As they kept moving, they prepared for the final ascent up to the dry cave entrance, and their adrenaline levels began spiking. While preparing for the final ascent, Patrick was leading the way and made a 90-degree move into that final section. However, he could no longer see his partner's flashlight. He didn't panic though, as the terrain was very narrow in this region and they could not move simultaneously, so he waited. Suddenly, he saw Huotarinen's flashlight moving erratically, as if Huotarinen was in a state of shock or intense panic, with the light waving up and down, signaling distress. Patrick's heart began racing as he tried to locate his friend in the darkness of that depth. Finally, he was able to make his way back to Huotarinen, who demanded that Patrick remove his bailout cylinder as it seemed to be blocking his path. Patrick did that in haste, but still, Huotarinen remained trapped and couldn't move. Then, Patrick noticed that the cord of Huotarinen's scooter was stuck between two rocks. Though it seemed like an easy task to free the cord, even after being freed from the rocks, Huotarinen was still panicking and screaming, asking Patrick to give him the bailout gas. At this point, there was nothing in Huotarinen's mouth. Now panicking, Patrick placed a regulator in Huotarinen's mouth and pressed the purge, but Huotarinen inhaled cave water instead, sealing his fate due to the excess amount of carbon dioxide at such depths. Sadly, Patrick could confirm that his friend was dead. Now he needed to focus on getting up the cave to warn the others about the blocked passage ahead and behind them. When he checked his dive computer to see how long it would take him to get out of the water, it showed approximately 7 hours. Patrick was shocked by this, as previously, he had just 2 hours remaining in the water. The amount of time he spent at such depths and in the freezing temperature had drastically increased his decompression time. With little oxygen left and a very slim chance of survival, Patrick made the ultimate decision to leave Huotarinen behind. It took them little to no time to make their descent into the depths of the cave, passing through the same way that Patrick and Huotarinen had come. They knew nothing of Huotarinen's dead body lying just ahead of them. As they reached the 90-degree ascent point leading to the last chamber, even though they had all the necessary supplies, one of them still wanted to bring an additional cylinder, just to be safe. Visa wanted to bring the extra cylinders, so Kai helped him hold on to one of them. It was a little past 2 p.m., and they were already at great depths, where decompression was becoming a crucial factor to consider. Visa was leading the way, but when they reached a certain depth, his fins got stuck between some rocks, resulting in a 5-minute delay. This mere 5-minute delay at such depths would translate to almost an hour of decompression time when ascending from the cave. As Vesa was about to start the ascent, the constant beeping sound of a failed apparatus shook him to his core. He couldn't bear to look at Huotarinen's lifeless body and informed the others quietly about the tragic discovery. Trying to stay calm under such circumstances, since panicking at these depths would only lead to death, he did his best to push through the narrow space that was now partially blocked by Huotarinen's body. On the other hand, Jari Yu was not handling the situation well. His emotions got the better of him, and within moments, he was dead. Kai then decided to make a U-turn back through the entrance they had come from, while Vesa made his way through another passage. Hardening their hearts in the process, both men had to maintain cool heads to prevent the same fate that had befallen their two friends from happening to them. Ultimately, the time spent at the depth of the cave would cost more decompression stops for Kai as he made his way back through the route they had taken. He wasn't sure if his oxygen would last through the computer's decompression stops, so he decided to risk decompression sickness rather than dying in the cave by drowning. He eventually made his way to the air chamber, where he was able to breathe the oxygen there, which was sustainable enough for him to stay alive for days, at least. However, he couldn't count on that, and proceeded with his final ascent of 36 feet up. One thing he didn't know was that, on the other side, Patrick was also making his way up the dry cave and was almost at the end of this terrifying journey. As Patrick moved, edging closer to the entrance above, he spotted light beneath him, which turned out to be Vesa. Having come so close, he made his way to the entrance and pulled himself out, patiently waiting for Vesa to reach the entrance as well. Patrick's dive took about 9 hours, 4 hours longer than the proposed 5 hours they should have spent in the water, and he reached the cave entrance at about 9 p.m. that same day. While waiting at the dry cave and rummaging the backpack of his friends, he then saw the light from Vesa's torch draw closer and closer as he made his way out, and the two amigos were reunited. On the other hand, Kai made his way out of the cave 3 hours later and moved to the frozen lake entrance when he couldn't spot the entrance. He figured out that the open section has frozen over, but it wasn't thick though, as he could locate it and break through it. Coming out of the cave, he realized he was the only one there, and thought the worst had happened to his compatriots. He went to the van, started the engine, and left the headlights on as he collapsed on the ground to rest, while Vesa and Patrick moved over to the farm and changed into normal clothes. They immediately informed Norwegian authorities about the death of their friends, unknown to them that Kai survived. It didn't take long for them to spot the van in a distance with headlight on, and they made their way to the van only for them to find Kai on the floor shivering, and they could confirm that they were the only ones that made it out of the caves alive. They were immediately hospitalized. They spent an awkwardly long period of time in the hospital, but even with that, Vesa suffered from a spinal injury as a result of the decompression sickness, while Kai had serious anxiety and just wanted to return home to his family. In the midst of this, the police investigated the occurrence and questioned the men before concluding that it was an accident that caused the deaths of both men. The state then devised measures to retrieve the bodies of Jari and Huotarinen by hiring 3 experienced English divers for this rescue. However, when they arrived, they were unable to retrieve the bodies as it was too dangerous. When Patrick heard that the bodies could not be retrieved by the state, he contacted a few of the divers he knew, and they attempted a secret rescue mission without the knowledge of the local authorities, as those authorities could shut them down before they even started. Patrick led the group alongside some very experienced divers. Vesa wasn't cleared to dive, as he was still recovering from his decompression sickness, but he assisted from above. Eventually, they were able to recover the bodies of both men and honor them with a proper burial with their families. This event was dreaded and painful, but it didn't stop the surviving trio from taking on another diving expedition in Spain. This tragic tale reminds us of the risks involved in extreme cave diving, even for the most skilled divers. Please make sure to respect the boundaries of nature and always prioritize safety when exploring. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more detailed accounts of incredible and dangerous adventures. Stay safe, and see you next time. There was a brutal incident at Halona Blowhole on June 30, 2002, involving 18-year-old Daniel Dick, who was vacationing in Hawaii with his mother and 2 younger brothers. Daniel had just graduated as the student body president from his high school in Los Angeles, and was preparing to attend California State University in the fall. He was an upstanding young man, whose future, as people would say, was brighter than the sun, and even before this trip, he had been working part-time at a grocery store. That morning, Daniel headed down to the beach, intending to swim and soak up some sun. Soon, he met 3 girls, and, after about 30 minutes of chatting, the ridiculous idea came to him, and he foolishly suggested they climb over the fence to check out the blowhole. A blowhole is a narrow hole on the rocks near the crashing waves, formed by molten lava, one that connects to a tunnel that leads to the water, causing waves to shoot up through the hole in a spectacular geyser. Now, I don't know if they didn't teach this in science class, but while the blowhole could look extremely fascinating from a distance, there are few things as dangerous as it when up close. The beach Daniel and the girls were on was near the notoriously dangerous Halona Blowhole. The tunnel connected to some of the most turbulent waters in Hawaii, causing waves to rocket 30+ feet into the air. To ensure safety, a fence and warning signs were placed around the blowhole, emphasizing the need to keep a distance due to the powerful water surging through the tunnel. Standing safely behind the fence, you could feel the ground tremble as the waves rumbled through the tunnel and exploded out of the blowhole. Daniel's family and friends described him as adventurous rather than reckless, always eager to experience new things. But this decision to want to see the blowhole was suicidal. Yes, the blowhole intrigued him, and he couldn't resist the urge to get up close and personal with it. Despite warnings from the girls, Daniel insisted on feeling the power of the water hitting him in the chest. Determined, Daniel headed towards the rocks, passing a couple enjoying their time on the beach. He waved at them, climbed up the rocks, and scaled the fence, timing it perfectly. He waited for a geyser to shoot up and subside before positioning himself over the edge of the hole, hovering his chest just above where the water would surge. The first wave shot up, hitting Daniel in the chest and staggering him. The girls and the couple yelled at him to move away, but Daniel was resolute in this idiocracy. He moved again, leaning back over the blowhole just as a massive wave barreled through the tunnel. The water erupted, lifting him 5 feet into the air and flipping him upside down. I cannot begin to imagine the fear on the faces of the girls and the couple. And then it happened. Daniel fell headfirst into the blowhole, his body forming a perfect dive. The narrow opening of the blowhole extended down 8 feet before widening into a cavernous space, like the inside of a teapot, filled with violent, churning water. This section connected to an underground tunnel leading out to the sea, and this was the deal breaker. Once inside, there was no way back up. The narrow opening provided no grip, and the force required to push oneself out was insurmountable. The only possible escape was through the underwater tunnel, constantly pounded by waves. Swimming through this tunnel was nearly impossible, as the waves would push back or trap anyone attempting the journey. Daniel's fate was sealed, as he was forced into the cavern, with 0 to no chance of resurfacing. As soon as Daniel vanished into the blowhole, the couple and the 3 girls scrambled up the rocks, jumped over the fence, and peered into the tunnel, desperately calling his name. They shouted for others on the beach to call 911. Each time a wave surged through the tunnel, they felt the ground shake and knew that if Daniel were still alive, he was being submerged for around 30 seconds with each wave. By the time the police arrived, Daniel had been trapped in the blowhole for some time, with no signs of life or sound from him. The situation looked increasingly bleak. The authorities declared it nearly impossible for anyone to survive inside the blowhole, especially at high tide, which was when Daniel had fallen in. The police explained they couldn't send divers until low tide because the conditions inside the blowhole were too dangerous. The best they could do was drop a weighted line into the blowhole, anchored on the outside, in the hope that if Daniel was somehow still alive, he could grab the line and hold on until rescuers could reach him. However, pulling himself through the narrow opening to safety was unlikely. The next day, during low tide, divers went into the water and found Daniel's body floating near the entrance where the water gets sucked into the tunnel and out through the blowhole. It seemed he had been pulled back out through the tunnel to the sea. It remained unclear how long Daniel had survived after falling into the blowhole, or if he had attempted to swim through the tunnel, but ultimately he drowned. In the aftermath, Daniel's mother petitioned for a metal grate to be placed over the blowhole to prevent future accidents. However, this proposal faced opposition from locals who argued that the issue was not the blowhole itself, but rather people failing to respect the power of nature. While the fence around Halona Blowhole remains, warning people to keep their distance, the entrance to the Blowhole itself is still uncovered. This incident serves as a grim reminder of the dangers that lurk in nature's most fascinating features, and also a warning that there is only but a thin line between adventurousness and recklessness. In this case, it was nothing more than youthful recklessness. The next incident is even more gruesome and sad. Despite numerous warnings, Darren Spivey took his 15-year-old son, Dylan, to one of the most dangerous caves ever known to man. Sadly, the frigid depths would ultimately claim their lives in a desperate struggle for air. In 2014, Darren Spivey, a 35-year-old avid scuba diver, wanted to share his love for diving with his son, so on Christmas Eve, Darren gave Dylan scuba tanks as an early present. They were both eager to use them, discussing and intensely planning a dive for the next morning. On Christmas morning, the father and son woke up after struggling to sleep due to the excitement, and they headed straight to a local dive site, only to find the gate locked. Determined, Darren decided to take them to another dive site in Central Florida, within a wildlife management area, open 24/7 to hunters, hikers, and divers. The pair drove to the park entrance, and were beyond happy to find out that it was indeed open. They exited the car, put on their wetsuits and scuba gear, and waddled over to a wooden walkway that extended from the parking lot out onto a pond like a dock. As they walked, they passed numerous signs warning against diving in this pond unless they were expert divers. Just imagine. This was the second sign from God telling them that today was definitely not the day for diving. First, the dive area they wanted to enter was locked, and now this one had a serious warning. This seemingly tranquil pond was the entrance to the infamous and deadly Eagle's Nest, known in the cave diving community as the Mount Everest of cave diving. At the bottom of the placid pond lay a narrow hole, the entrance to a tunnel that descended straight down. This was the only way in or out of a massive underwater cave system. Expert divers would grab the guideline leading into the cave and follow it down until the light above faded, leaving only black nothingness below. At the end of the tunnel, the space opened into a massive chasm called the ballroom. In the ballroom, even the most powerful flashlight couldn't reveal the walls, making it feel like being in outer space. The guideline continued straight down to the bottom of the ballroom, around 130 feet deep, where a sign with a grim reaper warned, "Stop, prevent your own death. Do not go any further. There's nothing in this cave worth dying for." This sign marked the last easy chance to turn around and return to the surface. Beyond the sign, the cave branched into two directions, with the tunnels becoming narrower and more evil, pardon my choice of words, descending to depths of 300 feet. Even for experienced divers, this area was extremely dangerous. A current flowed through Eagle's Nest, and losing the guideline could result in being swept away and lost in the pitch-black cave, making it nearly impossible to find the way out. Many divers had died attempting these dives, as small mistakes at such depths could be fatal. The warning sign aimed to prevent further tragedies. Yet, as Darren and Dylan stood at the end of the walkway, ready to jump into the pond, they were unfazed by the warnings. Neither of them were expert divers. In fact, Dylan wasn't even certified. Before they jumped into the water, Darren texted his fiancée, saying they were at Eagle's Nest and about to dive, promising to call when they resurfaced. Then, he put his phone away, and they both plunged into the water, swimming towards the entrance of Eagle's Nest. Hours passed with no call from Darren. As the sun began to set, Darren's fiancée, growing worried, decided to check on them. She drove to the parking lot at Eagle's Nest. She spotted Darren's car, but saw no sign of the boys. Alarmed, she called the police. Soon, professional divers arrived at Eagle's Nest to search for Darren and Dylan. The divers entered the water, swam to the narrow entrance, and descended the tunnel into the ballroom. Holding the guideline, they scanned the ceiling with their flashlights, knowing that bodies were often found near the entrance in cave diving accidents. Their lights fell on Dylan's lifeless body, trapped against the ceiling just 6 feet from the entrance. His emergency flotation devices had inflated, his mouthpiece was out, and his tanks were empty. The divers retrieved Dylan's body and returned to Eagle's Nest, following the guideline down to the bottom of the ballroom. There, they found Darren lying on a sandy hill, his mouthpiece out, his tanks also empty. He was next to the infamous sign with the Grim Reaper that read, "Stop, prevent your own death, don't go any farther." Both Darren's and Dylan's gauges indicated they had descended to 230 feet. To put this in perspective, recreational diving ranges from 0 to 130 feet, where divers can use regular air and require minimal training. Below 130 feet, divers need special gas mixes, advanced equipment, and extensive training, all of which Darren and Dylan lacked. An investigation into their deaths concluded it was a tragic accident. The prevailing theory is that Darren and Dylan entered the ballroom ballroom, descended to the bottom, and ventured into one of the 2 tunnels branching off. They reached a depth of 230 feet, where they likely experienced nitrogen narcosis, a state akin to drunkenness. In their impaired condition, they probably lost track of time and their air supply. When they returned to the ballroom to ascend, they had run out of air. Dylan likely ran out first, showed his father his empty gauge, and Darren, seeing this, gave his son his regulator to share air. As they ascended together, Darren's tanks also emptied. He lost consciousness and sank to the bottom. Dylan, managing to get a full breath, tried desperately to swim to the surface. He inflated his emergency flotation devices to rise faster, but in his panic, lost hold of the guideline. He swam up, hit the ceiling, and unable to find the exit, drowned. Despite all the warnings, both outside and within the cave, cautioning inexperienced divers to stay away, Eagle's Nest continues to lure divers. To date, 11 people have perished in its depths. It takes another level of guts to undertake some of the most dangerous and frightening adventures that many explorers do not think twice about taking on. Exploring some of the most uncharted parts of the water is something that intrigues the brave-hearted and adventurous personas in the cave diving community. This story happens to be one of the scariest cave diving expeditions gone wrong. Sit back, relax, and listen to the sad tale of Rob Parker. Of all the several locations in the world that possess a blue hole, the Caribbean has the majority of blue hole numbers, with Andros, the largest island in the Bahamas, having more blue holes than any other in the Caribbean. Blue holes, as wondrous as they can be, are noted among some of the most dangerous places on Earth. Outside of an uncharted underwater cave, a blue hole is scarier than that. They are basically sinkholes that are composed of highly carbonated rocks that slowly develop over a long period of time. Having no external drainage, a blue hole is just a basin. At the opening of a blue hole, sea life would be present, but when you decide to go in deeper, it is duly absent, as the depths of blue holes are toxic and specially filled with hydrogen sulfide. Due to the absence of oxygen in the depths of this hole, termed as anoxic, it makes it extremely dangerous for one to explore this location, as a diver can easily suffer from nitrogen narcosis, where the person slowly begins to lose consciousness of their surroundings. Divers going into these depths have to be highly trained and skilled effectively in underwater diving, as articulation in these parts is different from normal, and the chances of fatalities are raised to a maximum. Deep in the barrier reef along the fault line of the Bahamas is a blue ocean hole called the Four Sharks Blue Hole. The entrance of the hole is a coral-reefed basin, and it adherently leads to arguably the largest caverns in all of the Bahamas. Analyzing the terrain of this cavern, it has 2 chambers. The first chamber is a 230 feet long and 65 feet wide space that is called the Calic Cavern, as this part has been explored fully and completely mapped out, and is over 196 feet deep. Meanwhile, stretching to the far side at the right of the cavern, there is a narrow crack at about 131 feet, and it descends into another passage, unexplored, with unknown depths and unknown composition. It is highly advised to stay away from this cavern, as there is no specific information about this part, with only a very narrow passage prior to entering that second part. It requires perfect navigation to avoid the sharp crevices around the passage. Rumors surrounding this unexplored cavern suggest that upon entering this second chamber, the immediate sights are literally out of this planet. Ultimately, it's a literal death wish to enter into this second cavern, as it hasn't been explored. But this is the driving force to inspire the risk-taking and highly adventurous cave divers into exploring that part and, charting it out. The tale of the explorer Rob Parker, a 35-year-old from Bournemouth, England, has always been an adventurer from a young age, as he was always participating in adventure sports and loved climbing the cliffs along the Dorset coastline. At a very young age, he had established himself as one of the country's top cave explorers and climbers. He did this after he moved to Bristol, which had the luxury of the Mendip Caves very close to him. Music to Rob's ears, I guess. Rob started to engulf himself in cave diving travails when he heard one of his cave explorer friends had gone into that field. And Rob is the kind of person who believes, anything you can do, I can do better. He was set to one-up his friends and venture into cave diving because, yes, Rob was very competitive and a highly competitive individual, and he set out to conquer this field as he had in cave exploration and climbing. In no short time, Rob associated himself with a mentor, a cave diving legend named Martin Farr. He was then introduced to Wookie's cave complex by his mentor. Rob had endless energy and was a serious go-getter who always sought to make the impossible possible. This association with Martin Farr was the seed of Rob's growth in the cave diving and exploration field. Now, this was the beginning of the rocketing movement of his career. In 1984, the hunger for adventure in Rob took him to Mexico to get a chance to work hand-in-hand with a top American cave diver named Bill Stone. The pair's competitive and go-getting nature aided in both of them building a strong relationship with one another, and their relationship thrived. The following year, Stone came to the UK to serve as a support diver and also a technical advisor to Rob for his exploration of the Wookiee system. In no time, Rob started taking on projects both in England and abroad as his services were required, and he began to gain the recognition he so desired. Rob continued to explore caves above and below water, playing leading roles in the exploration of the Bohemian blue holes to the uncharted caves in China. Rob Parker became extremely famous for his work as his resume continued to grow beyond bounds, recognizing him as one of the best cave explorers in the entire world. At some points too, he was also carried around in military transport, as Rob was contracted by some countries to assist and undertake some rescue missions. At this point, he was really well known, and his resume had expanded farther than what he'd expected, leading him to another expedition with Bill Stone and a couple of experienced U.S. divers to explore one of the world's deepest underwater caves at Wakula Springs in northern Florida. The group used a different kind of technology to explore the caves. The recently discovered mixed gas technology with futuristic underwater scooters and a specially designed diving bell. A new rebreather system designed by Bill Stone, a gear similar to the ones that astronauts use for space exploration, allowing divers to spend up to 24 hours at a time underwater. In the coming years, Rob started to develop some illnesses that were coming at random intervals due to his numerous explorations, and he was gradually becoming rusty in the art. So, he decided to turn his focus to some other interests, and then diversified into climbing. As he already had a history in his early years of climbing the cliffs at the Dorset coastline, he climbed Mount Everest, and was a well-recognized extreme technical climber who toured the world in fulfilling his major interest. This climbing business he started was so successful that he would not be required to take a regular job. Regardless of all this, Rob's interest in diving didn't waver, as he was still undertaking some diving here and there. Things got a little bit interesting when, while on a dive in the Bahamas, Rob met Rob. That is, Rob Parker met Rob Palmer for the very first time. Rob Palmer was one of Britain's leading technical advisors and divers, well noted in this art, and was well known for his exploration and writing on the blue holes in the Bahamas. Stargate, a spectacular inland blue hole in the Bahamas, was set to be explored by a team of explorers, all led by Rob Palmer in the 1980s. It was more than a 300-feet drop from below the center of the Andros jungle. After that expedition, Palmer continued to explore Stargate a couple of times. During one of his explorations, he found an Indian canoe that was dated to be about hundreds of years old. In another expedition, he also found some Indian bones that were dated back to about 500 years old. He did not hesitate to turn over these artifacts to the Department of Archives in Nassau. Palmer then shifted into filmmaking, as he was hired to help with the filming of a German television show on blue holes. Before they started filming, he attended a technical diving conference in Hurghada, Egypt. While at the conference, a seawall was mentioned, and being fascinated by the concept of a seawall, he decided to explore one. The moment they were in the water, Rob Palmer dived straight into the blue rather than going towards the seawall. His friends then tried to grab him, but Rob was descending so fast they decided to stop once they had gone down about 200 feet and watched from afar as he descended. Confused about whether he was out of control or not, they didn't know what to do, and in a short time, they lost sight of him. Reports stated that he was using borrowed equipment, and as a result, he was met with a health crisis as he had a heart attack. He died in August 1997. After that tragedy happened, Rob Parker was called upon to undertake the role they expected Palmer to take before his demise. This part was going to be filmed in the very dangerous blue hole, the Four Sharks blue hole. Parker had a dive partner named Dan Malone, who had both been diving into depths of over 350 feet in a cave system that had been explored, but was just nearby. After 10 days of diving into these depths, they rested for the next 2 days to clear out the excess nitrogen from their system. The filming was about to start, and the pair decided to go diving one more time. This time, they wanted to dive into the Four Sharks blue hole. They saw this as an opportunity to push farther than just the first cavern, and to enter into the forbidden and dangerous uncharted cavern. He knew that the filming crew would not let him venture into those parts, so the plan was to go in there and come out before the filming crew was ready for filming. His friend and diving partner Dan Malone was skeptical about the entire idea, but he didn't want to turn down Rob, so he gave his consent to go ahead with the event. Other divers found out about this plot and wanted in on it too, but said they weren't going to go all the way to the unexplored cavern and would only stay at the Calic Cavern. They pushed down into the hole as they descended over 300 feet beyond the previously discovered limit. However, they didn't take the right tide and had no choice but to turn back to avoid being pushed or pulled by the inflow of water from the open ocean. Eventually, the slack tide came at about 8 p.m., and Dan, alongside Rob, descended into the hole, attempting to enter the forbidden passage. Both men wore their tanks side-mounted to navigate the dangerous narrow passage, marked their guideline in and out of it, and then proceeded through the unexplored cavern. Everything was going well, just as they had hoped for going into this cavern. After setting sights on scary but amazing views, they both decided to make their way out of the cave as they were beginning to run out of air, and the slack tide could change at any time. As they were making their way out of the cavern, one of the regulators on Dan's tank failed, forcing him to switch to using compressed air. It was really terrifying, but being an experienced diver, he kept a cool head. As a result, he had a huge narcosis rush, which felt like drinking a large pack of beer in seconds. When they got to the passage, the rush stopped. As they kept moving, it looked like Rob was signaling to him as if he was in distress and needed some help. But then Rob shook his head as if he was fine. It wasn't comforting for Dan, but he kept swimming as he was ahead and Rob was below him. After a while, he looked down and saw that Rob had stopped kicking his fins and was starting to descend as if he were free-falling into the water. Terrified, Dan rushed after him to catch up and began to assist him in getting up the passage. He managed to grab him by the ankle and pull him up. It appeared that Rob was unconscious at this point, but then, when they got to the edge of the passage, Rob started moving again and was flapping his fins as he had before. Dan was so relieved as they both made the ascent up the passage. His air was almost exhausted, but they had spare tanks at the other end. When they eventually got there, a relieved Dan took one of the tanks and replenished his oxygen. However, as he looked back, he saw no sign of Rob anymore. He then called the attention of the support diver to assist him in recovering Rob, as it seemed he had lost consciousness and free-fallen into the depths once more. Dan was taken aback by what had just happened, and he really couldn't believe his eyes. When he arrived at the surface at about 2 a.m., he climbed back on the dive boat and told Rob's friend and the German TV crew what had happened down below and that Rob was not coming back. Steffi, the wife of Rob Palmer, was furious that she wasn't called upon to assist in the rescue of Rob, but Dan disagreed, saying any attempt would have led to double losses. It wasn't until 2 days later that his body was recovered, and it's still unclear what caused his death. Reports suggest that he died due to nitrogen narcosis and was disoriented. It was a really sad tale, as he was a very skilled, and at the same time, cautious diver. Nonetheless, this reminds us of the danger that revolves around all kinds of cave diving, as it has reportedly claimed the lives of so many. And that was the chilling tale of Rob Parker's tragic dive. This story is a sobering reminder that even the most skilled divers can face unforeseen dangers when pushing the limits of human exploration. Cave diving is a thrill, but it demands extreme caution. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more incredible stories from the world of extreme adventure. And remember, stay curious, but stay safe. See you in the next one. In an attempt to reset and re-establish the record for no-limit diving, Audrey Mestre, who was initially the record holder for this meticulous award, embarked on a mission to break the record for no-limit diving that Tanya Streeter, a fellow diver, went on to surpass and break. The initial record set by Audrey was a depth of 427 feet below sea level, but then Tanya broke this record by reaching depths of 525 feet. Of course, Audrey saw her stance being displaced and decided to reset the timeline, unknowingly setting herself up for a stunt that would ultimately take her life. It was the year 2002, on the 17th of August, when Tanya Streeter decided to cause an upset in the diving community by making a descent into the deep waters, defying the laws of physics and breaking the natural and biological limitations of the human body. Diving into depths where the water pressure was up to 2 times the atmospheric pressure on the surface of the Earth, and in just 35 seconds, she had already gone down depths of over 166 feet. Using a metal sledge mechanism, she continued the descent into the ocean at an astounding depth of 166 feet. People believed that this was the limit for any human descending into the ocean, where the water pressure is at a manageable level, but Tanya still had a long way to go if she wanted to break the record set by Audrey. The descent into lower depths was not just a normal feat, but as she understood how the human body works and how her adaptation could kick in swiftly, her body did something quite amazing to deal with the strong pressure. Her body is filled with a stimulating fluid called plasma to enable her to withstand the overwhelming pressure. Plus, she had been training and testing the limits of her body to meet and surpass levels she wouldn't have imagined. And as all diving tales go, there's always a scary occurrence. After 114 seconds of diving, she had already reached depths of 360 feet, and that was when something pretty alarming happened. While on the surface, she had taken too much breath, making her lungs very heavy. Accompanied by the pressure at such depths, she lost consciousness at some point in between. But then, ultimately, after 2 minutes, she reached her goal, an astounding 525 feet, breaking the previous record set in 2001 by Audrey Mestre. As she began the final stage of the ascent back to the surface, something lethal happened: nitrogen narcosis. The dizziness and uneasiness began to set in, but she motivated herself by thinking of how her family and friends would mourn her if she were dead. In a last grasp attempt, she activated the mechanism and made a jet move back to the surface, breaking the limit set by Audrey by almost 100 feet, strongly stamping her name in the annals of diving history. Born in the year 1974, on the 11th of August, Audrey was a native of France and born in Paris. Like most adventurous explorers and individuals, Audrey had a deep passion for the water for a very long time, as she was constantly drawn to the ocean and swimming-related leisure. When she was just 2 years old, she won a gold medal in a 25-meter swimming competition. Crazy, isn't it? But her exploits didn't stop there. At just 13, she took her first plunge into scuba diving. Everything seemed to be going great, but then her life took an unexpected turn when she started having complications, from typhoid fever to developing a syndrome called scoliosis, which bent her spinal cord, deforming her physical appearance. To manage this condition, she was instructed to wear a plastic corset to help keep her body intact. The only time she took off this corset was when she went swimming and had to remove the heavy apparatus. As a result, she spent most of her time in the water, as it was the only place that made her happiest. In the coming years, Audrey's family moved to Mexico, where her passion for the ocean paved the way for her to attend La Paz and major in marine biology during her university years. While conducting research on how the human body responds to deep-sea diving, she became captivated by an exceptional diver, well known for his sea exploration, competitive spirit, and breath-holding ability, the legendary Francisco Pipin Ferreras, a sensation in the diving world. Growing up, Pipin faced many challenges as he had several deficiencies and was not considered normal by others. Despite that, he thrived and even learned to swim before he could walk. His deformities did not hold him back from becoming one of the best in the diving world. In 1996, while Audrey was in school conducting her research, Pipin coincidentally scheduled a dive in nearby waters, and Audrey decided to use the opportunity to interview him for her research. As a result of their meeting, they instantly took a liking to each other, and their relationship blossomed. They became symbols of determination and motivation for one another, both in their diving ventures and in the romantic journey they were about to embark on. In the year 1999, the pair got married, and this was when things became very interesting as they became a record-setting and record-breaking duo, undertaking several dives and dividing the men's and women's records between each other. In the world of free diving, the IDA, International Association for the Development of Apnea, set very strict safety standards, all in an effort to control the amount of risky behaviors portrayed while diving. Being a very competitive and energetic diver, Pipin saw the rules as too strict and not meeting his requirements. As a result, he decided to build his own regulatory body named the IAFD, which stands for the International Association of Freedivers. Wait, Hold up. Free divers. We can see the motive here. Creating a regulatory body where restrictions wouldn't be an issue for them. In the year 2000, Pipin decided to take on a record-breaking dive, reaching depths of 525 feet. He did it, but on the Ascent, he experienced a blackout, which unfortunately rendered his dive null. That attempt made him shift his focus to his beloved wife Audrey, as he began pushing her to undertake some very dangerous dives, setting meaningful records along the way. She then pushed herself to the extreme limit by diving to a depth of 410 feet, setting a record despite blacking out on Ascent. Based on IAFD's revised rules, the record stood, and just a year later, she went on to shatter her own record by reaching a depth of 427 feet. Then in 2002, 1 year later, Tanya set out to shatter the record, and oh boy, did she destroy it. Not only did she equal the record, but she shattered it completely, surpassing Audrey's 427 feet by a significant margin. This remarkable achievement applied immense pressure on Audrey and Pipin's team, as they felt the need to up their game and speed up their training and diving sequences to recover the record they had just lost, unknown to them that speeding up the process would lead to disaster. Eventually, on the 9th of October 2002, Audrey was able to descend to a depth of 558 feet in a practice dive. Due to this, her team believed she could reach about 561 feet on a single breath and reclaim her spot. During this period, Audrey was occasionally unhappy, as she and her husband were constantly arguing over matters that we don't seem to have knowledge about. However, rumors on the street suggested that Audrey was planning on divorcing him after the dive. Alas, the day of the dive arrived. It was the 12th of August 2002, just 3 days after Audrey's practice dive. To everyone's shock, she isolated herself, cutting off communication with the team and instructing them not to come near her dive gear. She even told the support staff to stay back. Pipin was panicking, but no one was allowed to check the tank for the return bag, a crucial safety measure that should have been double and triple checked before any dive. Even more worrying, several of the safety divers couldn't make it that day, leaving a significant gap in the support team, particularly at the deeper depths. One key safety diver, who was supposed to be positioned at 427 feet, had tragically lost his life in a cave diving expedition earlier, and his absence was never properly addressed. This left a crucial void in the dive plan. Normally, having robust support at different stages of the dive is a life-saving measure. Just for reference, when Tanya completed her record-breaking dive, she had 16 surface divers all around her, making sure nothing went wrong. In Audrey's case, there were only 2 safety divers, one stationed at a depth of 263 feet and the other at the maximum depth of 558 feet. The missing support diver at 427 feet was never replaced, leaving an enormous gap in coordination and reducing the safety net needed to handle any mishap. Despite these alarming oversights, the dive, which was sanctioned by Pipin's self-made regulatory body, IAFD, was allowed to proceed. This decision ignored the regulations of the IDA, which strictly enforced safety measures that could have prevented potential disaster. Despite the risks and complications, Pipin approved the dive, and Audrey began her descent into the depths. So, with one big inhale, Audrey began her descent into the ocean to set a new world record. However, as she started, there was a sense of worry among the crew members that something was off, but they couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. The second diver, Pascal Bernabé, stationed at 564 feet, noticed and stated that the cable was not behaving as it should, indicating that something was definitely wrong. By this point, the descent had already begun, and Audrey was on her way to breaking the record. The goal was for Audrey to reach her final depth at approximately 3 minutes, but she actually arrived at 2 minutes and 22 seconds. It seemed as though everything was going well and according to plan. However, when it was time for the ascent, disaster struck. The 3-step approach she was supposed to take to start her movement back to the surface wasn't working. She repeatedly tried to inflate the balloon, but to no avail. Then Bernabé came over and attempted to add air to the bag, like an underwater balloon, but there was no speed. the movement upward was sluggish. At this point, it became clear that Audrey would not make it to the surface in time to recover. The necessity of a second diver was now painfully evident, as he would have aided Audrey in making her ascent. Minutes passed, as the entire crew on the surface waited anxiously for Audrey's return, their hearts in their mouths. The first diver, stationed at 262 feet, saw no sign of Audrey and began to panic. It wasn't until Pascal spotted her, blacked out at about 394 feet, that he quickly grabbed her and started making his way up. By this time, Pipin had already put on his scuba outfit and descended into the sea to rescue his wife, fully aware that this could ultimately cost him his life. Nevertheless, he ventured down. When the bag surfaced without Audrey, everyone on the surface realized something had gone terribly wrong. At 295 feet, Pascal met Pipin, and together they brought Audrey up to the surface. Immediately they got out of the water. Pipin started CPR on his wife, as she still had a pulse at this point. When they got her onto the boat, the doctor present, who was just a dentist, didn't know what to do. So they rushed her to the shore to examine her, but by the time they arrived, she was already dead. Audrey died painfully at the age of 28. Shockingly, no investigation was carried out in this case because, in the Dominican Republic, the family would have to request one, but none did. As a result, the case was left unresolved, even when some people accused Pipin of killing his wife, Audrey. However, those close to them disagreed, as the pair both loved each other dearly. Investigations showed that many things had gone wrong, resulting in Audrey's death. For starters, the dive line was thinner than normal. It was made that way to reduce friction, but it actually made things worse, as it wasn't stable enough and slowed down the ascent. Additionally, an essential part had broken during a practice dive, and ultimately, there was a lack of air in the dive bag. Audrey Mestre was given an EFD award for the farthest no-limit dive at 561 feet, and in 2002, she was placed in the Woman Divers Hall of Fame. Then, in 2003, Pipin went ahead to match the record that Audrey set at 561 feet, choosing not to surpass that limit in memory of her. Up until now, no one has broken the record Tanya set. Maybe Audrey was the only woman capable of doing so, but unfortunately, she's gone. Audrey Mestre's story is a heart-wrenching reminder of the dangers in the world of extreme diving. Her determination and passion pushed the boundaries of human capability, but ultimately led to her tragic death. The risks of no-limit diving are undeniable, and safety must always be the top priority. If you found this story compelling, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more incredible stories of human endurance. And remember, always prioritize safety, no matter the adventure. Stay curious, but stay safe. This mysterious cave, surrounded by several rumors and speculations, intrigued these two men to explore, despite the fact they had no plan to maneuver the terrain and equally had no equipment to explore this uncharted cave. Hence, turning a regular day of camping into a nightmare when one of them attempted to go through an unknown passage. Stay tuned as we take you through the exploration of young Robert Kennedy as he struggled through the terrain of an unexplored cave, and ultimately, it cost him his life. With little to no preparation and zero caution for the danger of exploring an uncharted cave, Kennedy and his stepbrother Richard set out into a limestone cave in Oklahoma, famously known as the Hermit Cave. The mysteries and suspense-filled stories surrounding this wonder leave people in awe of what might just lie beneath the ground. But eventually, Kennedy was the curious cat that gambled everything and made his way into the cave. It was the 5th of April, 1999, when our 21-year-old curious Kennedy, all the way from Oklahoma, set out for a camping expedition near the limestone enclave of the Hermit Cave. It was situated at the eastern edge of Fort Gibson Lake, which was unsurprisingly located in the center of eastern Oklahoma. He didn't embark on this camping expedition on his own, though. He had the company of his stepbrother, Richard Steeler Jr., alongside the pair's mutual friend, Ben Keegley, who hailed all the way from Tulsa. The three guys had a night that was far from boring as they entertained one another by discussing the folklore and the mystery surrounding the nearby caves in the region, specifically the Hermit Cave, which had uncharted terrains and mysterious pathways. So many stories surrounded it, as some even believed that way underneath the caves would lie some treasures of sorts, or, most likely, gypsum formations. All this ensued as the trio sat beside a campfire and rested underneath the cosmic view of the tiny stars displayed in the sky of Oklahoma. The Hermit Cave was quite familiar among the locals in the area, but was completely clothed in mystery. Kennedy had knowledge of the main entrance of the cave, which many explorers considered boring. Meanwhile, Robert's curiosity revolved around the speculations of hidden passages around the cave that might lead to some hidden wonders. As the trio enjoyed the warmth of each other's company and the beauty of the night sky, it grew very late, and the cold of the night set in, forcing each of them to fall asleep. Upon waking the next morning, they all decided to have a little breakfast before setting out to their respective homes, but Robert had something else in mind. The previous night's discussion had ignited a sense of adventure in him, and now he wanted to take a diversion on the way home to explore one of the limestone caves in the region, specifically the Hermit Cave. His stepbrother Richard agreed to go with him. Ben would have followed them, but he had an early shift at his workplace, so it was just Robert and Richard. Now, proceeding with this expedition would mean breaking a cave exploration rule that clearly states no fewer than 3 people should undertake any cave exploration of any kind, as 3 individuals allow for a safety measure. If one explorer gets stuck, the second one would stay with him, and the third would head out to get help. But in this case, with just 2 participants, they went ahead anyway. As the mouth of the cave was not narrow, they both ventured into the cave with no equipment or safety gadgets of any kind. The only thing they had was a flashlight. The only thing that stopped Ben from going with them was his commitment to work, as he had that early shift. He was the first to give in to the idea of exploration, even as they knew they were violating the cardinal rule of having 2 companions before exploring a cave. They both went anyway. Ben's presence ultimately might have prevented the tragedy that befell 21-year-old Kennedy. After exploring the beautiful rock formation, which was the major attraction of the cave that caught the attention of both Robert and his stepbrother, while they were coming out of the cave, Robert spotted one of the sideways caves that had always been rumored about. He felt an abrupt flow of joy, as a chance to explore that which hadn't been mapped felt like an expedition worth any sort of risk. Had he known, he would have edged out and left the cave while he could. He started his venture into the unknown with a plan in place. He agreed with his brother Richard that he would be the only one to enter the narrow crevice while Richard waited outside the cave for him to come out. At that point, it seemed like a good idea until the unexpected happened. He promised his stepbrother that he would do well to come out as soon as possible and avoid venturing too deep into a cave. He had no idea how it was shaped. As he started moving through the cave, the path saw him move downward into another narrow region, which was measured at about 150 feet, having so many turns and twists that were very tough to navigate. With a path looking like it was created by a millipede, it took maximum skill and strategy to maneuver through this space, starting with sticking your head out in front of you, followed by the shoulders, and then finally your legs. Eventually, Robert got to the first dangerous region in this cave, reported to be a keyhole formation. Many believed that the first mistake Robert made was passing through the keyhole formation, as he didn't consider how he was going to go through that same point, but this time with his legs first, as there was no guarantee he would have enough space to be able to turn and face the other side. It wasn't long before he figured out that the space in front of him was too narrow and had a slimmer shape than he anticipated. So, he began to rethink his journey forward and decided to go back with his legs leading the way. Upon reaching the crucial keyhole zone, he couldn't pass through, as the upper part of his body on the other end prevented it. Seeing that move was a failure, he proceeded to move forward and squeeze through that narrow passage in front. That was the worst decision he had made since embarking on this expedition. He got stuck in that hourglass-shaped region. At that point, all his pushing and pulling were effortless, as gravity also seemed to be working against him. Not long after, Robert began to call out for help to his stepbrother outside. But of course, he was too far inside the cave to be heard by anyone around. It was unrecorded, and cannot be stated how long it took his brother to realize that this wait had been long overdue, as he decided to venture into that opening, following a faint light emitted from Robert's flashlight. Kneeling and screaming his brother's name as he made his way through, screaming back in hope, Robert called out to his brother, responding to the calls he heard, and letting him know that he was trapped and finding it really hard to breathe. In a vast determination to make sure he rescued his brother, Richard hurried blindly into the cave. But soon enough, he realized he couldn't do much without light and assistance. So he let his brother know and made his way out of the cave to converge with assistance and equipment to make the rescue easier. So then, in about an hour, Richard conveyed a large team of rescuers, 10 in number, all experts. They all began to put their heads together in order to devise a means to rescue the trapped Kennedy. Several factors complicated the rescue efforts made by the team to get him out. The main factor was the distance between Robert and the main entrance, which was about 46 meters, causing a really slow process and a lengthy distance to cover to get to him. Additionally, the narrow path was a significant challenge, as they could only proceed one step at a time. The rescuers also had issues with breathing due to the number of people entering the cave, prompting them to use a ventilation system to circulate warm air throughout the passages. They sought out different means to rescue him, but all proved to be either futile or an avenue for a collapse as they attempted to use manual methods to break through the passage. Nonetheless, the clock was ticking, and time was of the essence for dear Robert Kennedy. As exhaustion began to set in, the rescuers started rotating shifts to conserve energy, all in attempts to break the keychain and ultimately rescue Kennedy. With each rescuer taking note of Kennedy's status, they could all see that gradually, his health had begun to deteriorate as signs of suffocation started to appear. With each passing moment, the line between life and death for Robert Kennedy grew thinner. Eventually, the rescuers were able to break through the keyhole structure and made their way to Robert's feet. There was unresponsiveness at first, but then there was a faint pulse as he moved his legs a bit, which instilled hope in the rescuers. Attempts were made to pull him out, but it all turned out futile, as the hourglass structure held him tightly, and the sloppy terrain of that particular region made it impossible to pull him out. They went on to try a pulley system, but it would not hold due to the tenderness of the limestone structure. It was too soft, and all inputs were literally falling off. The next step was to dig around Robert, aiming to break the hourglass trap he was in. The narrowness of the trap made it virtually impossible to even pass a bottle of water to Kennedy, as he was clearly suffocating and gradually losing his life. It seemed to everyone that a Saturn ring of rocks had covered him entirely, making their job more tedious. It took about an hour before the rescuers were able to initiate movement on Kennedy's body. After a 5-hour rescue mission, they managed to dig around his body and proceeded to extract him from within the cave, bringing him to the entrance. Already waiting outside were the paramedics, who were on standby to assess his body and vitals and then transport him to the hospital. Unfortunately, this time around, they found no pulse, as he was already dead. It was believed by the paramedics that Robert died due to suffocation from chest compression and the low regulation of oxygen in that narrow path. The night started as a really interesting one, just chilling with friends, but it turned into an adventurous expedition. Well, it began as an adventurous journey, but ended in tragic tragedy, reminding us of the dangers of the unknown in this world. This story is a heartbreaking reminder of the risks of uncharted exploration. If you're ever tempted to explore places like this, remember the importance of preparation, safety, and following the rules. It's not just about adventure, it's about coming back safely. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more gripping tales, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Let us know in the comments what other stories you'd like us to cover next. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there. Sheck Exley, an American cave diver born on April 1, 1949, was just a different species. When it comes to diving, he was one of the most decorated divers in history. He became a prominent figure in the diving community, contributing significantly to safety standards and exploration techniques in the field. His versatility led him beyond the realm of cave diving into the realm of extreme deep scuba diving, where he pushed the boundaries of human endurance and skill. Sheck's accomplishments included writing the book Basic Cave Diving, a blueprint for survival in 1979, which remains a guide on safety and emergency procedures in cave diving today. Throughout his career, Sheck conquered over 4,000 cave dives by his mid-40s, becoming known for his ability to withstand the pressures and dangers associated with extreme depth. Depth affects the body internally, leading to nitrogen narcosis, a condition that can cause disorientation and hallucinations. He was almost completely immune to this condition, which allowed him to dive deeper than most. This was particularly evident during a 1970 dive where Sheck reached 465 feet before experiencing it, and he became the first person to descend below 800 feet in a technical scuba diving accident. In 1993, Sheck learned about the Zacaton sinkhole in northeast Mexico from his friend Jim Bowen, believed to be the deepest known water-filled sinkhole in the world back then. Zacaton, with a depth of 1,112 feet, sparked Sheck's interest, leading him to plan an ambitious dive with fellow explorer Jim Bowden. The sinkhole is located in the Zacaton system, a unique collection of karst features in Tamaulipas, Mexico, and is known for its thermal water and floating islands of zacate grass. Excited by the challenge, Sheck and Jim spent a year meticulously planning the dive. They calculated the precise gas mixtures and quantities needed for the descent and conducted numerous practice dives to prepare themselves both mentally and physically. Their preparation included assembling a support team of divers, including Sheck's wife, Mary Ellen, Bowden's wife, Karen, and 2 other divers, Ann Kutovich and Marcus Gary. The dive took place on April 6, 1994, just 6 days after Sheck's 45th birthday. Entering the sinkhole through a 600-foot spring close to Zacaton, Jim descended first, while Sheck followed about 10 seconds later. Sheck and Jim descended rapidly, aiming to reach the bottom as quickly as possible to minimize decompression time. As they descended, Sheck's experience and skill were evident as he maintained a deliberate breathing pattern to optimize gas consumption and prevent carbon dioxide buildup. However, as Jim crossed the 800-foot mark, he noticed Sheck's light far ahead, descending at an alarming rate. Sheck continued his descent despite experiencing symptoms of high-pressure nervous syndrome, a condition brought on by rapid compression that can cause neural disturbances. At 750 feet, Sheck paused to consider his options, but decided to continue. He finally reached 850 feet deep. At this depth, Sheck's body began shaking uncontrollably, likely due to the extreme pressure. Despite his impaired vision, he recognized the lunar-like landscape covered in small rocks and black sediment, confirming that he had reached an unexplored depth. Aware of the need to ascend quickly to avoid prolonged decompression, Sheck began his ascent, and the symptoms of high-pressure nervous syndrome gradually subsided. Meanwhile, Jim, who had descended to 900 feet, was quick to notice he had consumed more air than intended, which could affect his ascent. He switched his main tank to his backup tank. In an attempt to change his air tank, his regulator broke off, causing him to manually control his air supply by opening and closing the valve with each breath. Despite the stress, he continued his ascent, eventually reaching the installed air tank at 250 feet. However, as he ascended, he realized that Sheck's descent line and stage bottles had not been used, indicating that something was wrong. As Jim continued his ascent, he became worried about Sheck's fate, knowing full well that Sheck was supposed to be above him. Kristovich, the support diver who was charged with monitoring the bubbles, noticed only Jim's bubbles were visible, causing further concern. He dove to meet Jim and was relieved he was safe, and was also shocked to see Sheck's equipment untouched, suggesting he had not surfaced yet. Upon surfacing, he realized Sheck was not present, leading his mind astray. Mary, Sheck's wife, fearing the worst, dove in search of her husband, accompanied by Karen. Both were also left shocked upon seeing Sheck's equipment untouched. Mary, fearing the worst, took extra equipment and dove deeper in search of her husband, only to actually confirm his fate upon seeing his dead body. They went back to the surface. A joyful day became a sad one in an instant. Jim was treated for shoulder pain and other physical ailments, while a support team returned to the sinkhole the following day to recover Sheck's equipment. After 2 days of effort, Sheck's body was recovered, tied with lines around his arms and the valve of his mounted bottle. His wrist-mounted dive computer indicated a maximum depth of 904 feet, suggesting that the incident occurred 9 minutes into the dive. The autopsy, though challenging due to the effects of immediate decompression and the delay in conducting the post-mortem analysis, yielded no definitive cause of death. Sheck Exley's final dive marked the end of a remarkable career in cave diving and deep-water exploration, leaving behind a legacy of courage, skill, and contributions to the diving community. One thing to note is he died doing what he loved. Imagine being trapped in a cold, pitch-black cave, the only sound your own panicked breaths, and the only company a friend's lifeless body. This is what happened 10 years ago to Ricard and Dionisio in the Cova delles Arquettes region, a place of haunting beauty that would become their final resting spot. Ricard and Dionisio were seasoned adventurers, drawn to the challenge of the limestone cave, known for its underwater photography appeal and clear waters that invited many divers. On July 19, 2014, they set out with two other friends, eager to explore the depths and curious to know what the secret underwater was. As they ventured further, Ricard and Dionisio found themselves navigating a series of underwater caves, their paths illuminated only by flashlights. Eventually, they discovered the entrance to the Cove d'Arquette, also called the Cave of the Lobsters, a place few had dared to enter. The cave began with an alarming outlook, its entrance 33 feet below the surface, but soon transitioned into a narrow, unexplored section, looking like something straight out of a horror movie scene. One of their friends, sensing the danger, opted to return to the surface. Ricard and Dionisio, however, pressed on. They encountered an underwater cave not too long after they entered. As they swam deeper, the water became murkier, their visibility diminishing with every kick. When they decided to turn back, they found themselves disoriented, their exit obscured by a thick cloud of stirred-up silt. Trapped in a maze of confusion, their air supplies dwindling, they searched frantically for an escape. Amidst the panic, they noticed a small crack in the cave's ceiling, a faint light glimmering through. Desperation drove them to squeeze through the tight passage, scraping their bodies against the jagged rock. To their relief, the crack led to an underground air pocket, an improbable haven in the heart of the cave. For a moment, it seemed they had cheated death. Their escape was described as a mix of disbelief and euphoria. But the triumph was short-lived. As hours passed, the air pocket that had saved them now filled with carbon dioxide, turning into a death trap. The limited space became filled with carbon dioxide, silently poisoning the very air they breathed. Ricard, already weakened, succumbed to the toxic gas first, slipping into the water, unable to keep himself afloat. Dionisio, too, was fading, his strength waning as he tried to hold on to life. As their friends above grew anxious, the Gaius rescue diver, responsible for search and rescue, was alerted. Led by Corporal Fernando Aguirre, they prepared for the worst, assuming that by now Ricard and Dionisio had drowned. However, when the rescue team finally reached the underground lake, they found Ricard's lifeless body floating, and Dionisio clinging to the rocks, barely alive, his breathing heavy and erratic. The rescuers worked swiftly, administering oxygen and isotonic drinks to keep Dionisio conscious, though he resisted their help, confused and disoriented. It took the intervention of his diving friend and, eventually, sedation to get him to the surface safely. Dionisio became the first diver in Spain to survive such an ordeal, but the joy of his survival was overshadowed by the tragedy of Ricard's death. In the aftermath, a thorough investigation revealed that Ricard had died of hypercapnia, or carbon dioxide poisoning. The report highlighted the risks the pair had taken, including diving without proper preparation or equipment. Despite rumors and blame, the investigation cleared Dionisio of any wrongdoing, confirming he had tried everything to save his friend. The events that unfolded in that dark, underwater cave serve as a grim reminder of the fine line between adventure and disaster, and the need for caution in such environments. Number 3. In 2001, 3 daring explorers set out on a journey to Antarctica, unaware that their adventure would soon spiral into a colossal disaster. The expedition was led by Jill Heinrath, a legendary cave diver renowned for her fearless exploration of Earth's most treacherous caves. Alongside her were Wes Giles, an underwater cinematographer, and Paul Heinrich, a fellow expert diver. Their ambitious goal was to become the first to dive into the caves of the B-15 Iceberg, the largest iceberg in the world, nearly the size of Jamaica. Despite their enthusiasm, they were venturing into the unknown, with no certainty if the iceberg even contained a caving system. Yet Jill believed in the possibility of finding cracks and tunnels worth exploring. As they arrived and beheld the iceberg, Jill was struck by a profound sense of privilege and awe. But beneath that awe lurked a deep-seated anxiety. This was uncharted territory, and the frigid waters of Antarctica posed dangers they had never encountered before. Their adventure began with a risky situation. As Wes prepared to dive and capture the first photographs, his suit began to absorb the freezing Arctic water, transforming it into a deadly water balloon. Jill, well versed in the issues of cold water diving, knew that every second in such conditions could be fatal. Fortunately, they managed to get Wes out of the water just in time, and he was quickly bundled up to get rid of the cold. When it was time for Jill and Paul to make their descent into the iceberg, the initial plunge was a shock to their systems. The icy water hit them like a sledgehammer, stealing the air from their lungs and sending a chill straight to their bones. As they adjusted and began their dive, they found themselves surrounded by a surreal, slushy mix of broken ice. Pushing through, they descended to the ocean floor, where they encountered a haunting landscape teeming with beautiful sea creatures and stunning ice formations. The beauty of their surroundings was overshadowed by a growing sense of dread. As they ventured deeper, the creaking and groaning of shifting ice filled the water around them. Then, a violent vibration shook the very core of their beings. When they attempted to return to their entry point, they were horrified to find it blocked by a massive slab of ice. They were trapped, and the icy depths of the Antarctic Sea threatened to become their tomb. With a stroke of luck, they found another exit and began the grueling ascent, pausing at 20 feet to decompress and avoid the bends. When they finally surfaced, Wes and Matt, who had stayed on the boat, were overjoyed to see them. But the terror of the dive still lingered, the memory of the ice closing in on them like a vice. The next morning, their determination had not waned. They dived again, pushing further into the iceberg's depths, driven by the allure of the unknown. But this time, the ocean itself seemed to turn against them. A fierce current pulled them deeper into the iceberg, away from their planned route. The light within the icy tunnels played tricks on their eyes, making it impossible to gauge distances. They drifted, disoriented and powerless, for what felt like an eternity. When they finally emerged from the iceberg's grip, they were greeted by an even more terrifying sight. Their boat was gone. The colossal wall of ice loomed above them, blocking any view of their surroundings. The realization that they were utterly alone in the Antarctic wilderness, with no boat in sight, struck them with a primal fear. After what seemed like an endless search, they finally spotted their boat. The current had torn it from its anchor, but by some miracle, Wes and Matt had managed to regain control. The sound of Wes's voice as he called out to them was the sweetest sound Jill had ever heard. On their third day, despite the escalating dangers, they decided to dive one last time. Wes, unable to resist the pull of the iceberg, joined them in the water. But the current had become even more vicious, threatening to sweep them away. As they struggled to ascend, the walls of ice around them became slick and steep, offering no handholds. Jill, drawing on her experience, remembered that fish often hid in small pockets in the ice. Clinging to these, she led Wes and Paul back to the surface. Once safely aboard the boat, the gravity of their adventure sank in. They had narrowly escaped the iceberg's deadly grip. As they prepared for what could have been another dive, a loud noise broke the silence. They turned to see the cave they had just left collapsing into the sea. The realization hit them hard. Had they still been inside, they would have been crushed or drowned. This bone-chilling experience highlights the thin line between adventure and catastrophe. Despite the dangers, Jill, Paul, and Wes's bravery and determination have left a mark on the history of exploration. Their story is proof that human beings won't deviate from their quest for the unknown no matter what, which has led to a lot of the amazing facts we now know about the Earth. John Jones and his family made a dangerous decision to go caving at Nutty Putty, unaware of the tragedy that would soon unfold. This is the sad but very important story of the Nutty Putty Cave disaster. John, eager for some family fun, chose to explore Nutty Putty Cave, located in the Utah desert near Salt Lake City. Now, the thing was that John had not even for once visited this cave before, but he and his brother Josh had spent much of their youth exploring various caves in Utah. So I'm guessing John considered himself a seasoned caver, despite having less time for the activity recently due to marriage, fatherhood, and his demanding schedule as a medical student at the University of Virginia. And when he went back home for Thanksgiving to relax with family, all he could do was think of the joy of exploring, and he began planning a day of hiking and exploring at Nutty Putty, which is known as a beginner's cave. The main sections of Nutty Putty were fascinating for all visitors. The maze room featured openings and tunnels around large boulders, while the slide offered a sloped area descending at a 45-degree angle with a rope for guidance. It was a well-known fact that the cave system was well mapped in most navigable areas. However, there were more challenging sections like the birth canal and the aorta crawl. These places were known for their tight and difficult passages, suited only for experienced cavers. And I don't mean any disrespect to John, but yeah, he wasn't as experienced as he thought. Because of the challenges, people often got stuck in these narrow spaces, requiring significant help to extricate themselves. Due to too many problems and frequent rescues, Nutty Putty had been closed for several years, but had recently reopened with a new permit system, requiring a minimum of 2 experienced cavers per group. Josh had managed to secure a permit for a group to explore on Tuesday, November 24th, 2009, just before Thanksgiving. John's pregnant wife, Emily, stayed at home with their 1-year-old daughter, Lizzie, for a quieter evening with relatives. Their group of 11 family and friends began in the main open cave areas. Eventually, John, Josh, and 2 friends set off to find more challenging tunnels. They had heard of the birth canal and consulted the cave map for its location. This passage was notorious for its long, tight squeeze, ending up in a small room where one could stand and turn around. Now, this is what bothered me the most. Even though they were fully aware of the birth canal's reputation for inducing panic, even among experienced cavers, John and Josh still decided to attempt it. They split up to search for the tunnel, with John and Josh taking the left passage. They navigated a small tunnel for about 15 feet, encountering undulating elevations and rock outcroppings over the next 10 feet. The passage required them to twist their bodies in several weird ways to maneuver their shoulders, hips, and legs through the tight spaces. This area, known as the corkscrew, was infamous for its demanding contortions, navigable only by small and flexible cavers, and coupled with the fact that the cavers who had passed here reported to using all their skills to progress slowly. Beyond the corkscrew area, the passage angled upward for about 5 feet, then dropped over a rock ledge with a sharp left turn. Up to this point, cavers used the small area beyond the corkscrew to turn back if needed. 5 years earlier, a 16-year-old named Brock Clark had become wedged here. Despite being only 5 feet 7 inches and 140 pounds, it took rescuers 14 hours to free him. John Jones, however, was 6 feet tall and weighed 200 pounds, making turning around in this space practically impossible. He found himself in a 12-inch high area with insufficient lateral room to maneuver. Determined, John pushed forward, squeezing over the ledge, believing it would open up below. Unknown to John, he was the first ever caver to venture beyond this ledge, entering uncharted territory. Despite the tight and uncomfortable position, he remained calm, convinced an opening lay ahead. He thought he was still navigating part of the birth canal, a notorious section where many had felt trapped, but ultimately emerged safe. Moving headfirst at a downward angle, John's body slid toward the bottom of the tunnel, nearly performing a handstand. Gravity pulled his 200-pound frame against his weakening arms. He called out to his brother Josh, advising him not to follow but to retreat. They discussed John's options and decided the best course was to move forward and attempt to turn around. John, now almost completely upside down, glimpsed a hole ahead, hoping it led to a larger space. Optimistic, he probably thought they'd laugh about this over Thanksgiving dinner. He turned slightly toward the hole, but soon became wedged in an 18 by 10-inch space, barely larger than a laptop screen, trapped nearly upside down at a 70-degree angle. John's arms were pinned, one folded under his chest, the other stuck against a rock. Exhausted, he couldn't push himself back up the 5 feet to the shallow tunnel. His calves and feet remained free, but his legs were wedged in an 8-inch wide section. John frantically called out to Josh, who knew his brother's yells were a bad sign. Josh navigated the corkscrew feet first, moving toward John's voice. He finally saw John's legs protruding from the rock as if it had swallowed him. Josh inched forward, trying to grip and pull John up while John pushed from his end. Despite several attempts, they were both exhausted and frustrated. Realizing they needed professional help, they agreed Josh would seek assistance while John tried to stay calm. A family friend stayed with John to reassure him. For several hours, John remained trapped upside down, focusing on breathing. The fisher squeezed his chest, allowing only shallow breaths. His efforts to move had only wedged him deeper. When rescuers arrived, the first to reach John was Susie Mata, a 5-foot 3-inch caver. She tied ropes to her ankles as a precaution and checked on John, assuring him they'd get him out. Susie tied webbing straps around John's legs and relayed them back to the tunnel entrance. She even cut John's jeans just to create another half-inch of space, but despite multiple attempts, the friction on the ropes made it impossible to pull John free. After trying various methods, rescuers decided to use a pulley system, which had successfully freed Brock Clark 5 years earlier. However, bringing the equipment through the tight passages took nearly an hour. Only smaller tools could be carried in, and only one person could assist at a time. The situation was far from ideal. As the pulleys were painstakingly installed, cavers talked with John to keep him calm. He prayed and sang for solace, enduring the night upside down. By morning, The physical strain of his position was evident. The human body isn't designed to be inverted for long periods. Blood circulation relies on heart pulses, gravity, and valves to maintain oxygen flow and remove toxins, functions now severely compromised in John's upside-down state. John's body had been battling gravity seriously for over 12 hours. The human brain is definitely not designed to endure such fluid pressure, leading to fluids accumulating in his lungs and toxins building up due to poor circulation. His organs pressed against his lungs, making each breath an exhausting effort for muscles not meant for this kind of work. As his breathing slowed, John was completely drained. Throughout the night, he transitioned from calm and lucid to helplessly thrashing and hallucinating. It was painful for the rescuers to witness as they felt powerless and trapped themselves. The warm, damp air in the cave system made breathing difficult, but the rescuers knew they could exit when necessary. John, however, couldn't expand his chest to breathe properly, and the oxygen around him was gradually depleting. A wired telecomtom was set up near John. His wife spoke to him, encouraging her husband to hold on and stay faithful. John assured her he would be out soon. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the pulleys were finally in place. Ryan Schertz was in the tunnel when they began pulling John. John's body had settled into the narrow side of the opening, so Ryan had to push his legs as the team outside pulled. Each tug moved John inch by inch. His legs, tied with a rope for hours, were blue and had no pulse. Despite the pain, John called out to stop, as his nerves were highly sensitive. After a pause, they resumed. Slowly, John was lifted enough for Ryan to make eye contact and pass down a tube for him to drink Gatorade. The effort was slow and exhausting, with Ryan squeezed in a 12-inch high tunnel near John's legs. Although they were making progress, John's legs hit the tunnel's low ceiling, making it impossible to twist them into the passage. After 19 hours upside down, John couldn't help delicately bend his knees. Rescuers considered breaking his legs to free him, but time was running out. Suddenly, Ryan blacked out in blinding pain. When he regained consciousness, he was bleeding heavily and confused. The rope holding the pulley had broken, and the carabiner hit Ryan's face, causing severe damage. He had to be quickly removed, his own life now at risk. John was back to being completely wedged, with circulation cut off to his arms and his legs useless. This marked the beginning of John's final moments. After Ryan was sent to the hospital, John's father, Dave, took his place. It took an hour to re-establish the pulley lines, but Dave couldn't get a rope past John's wedged torso. John was unresponsive the entire time, and the rescue operation required his assistance to be effective. Dave's attempt to tie John resulted in him getting stuck for about 15 minutes. The desperate effort to save John endangered both his son and himself. Once Dave managed to push back into the tunnel, he was exhausted and had to leave. Brandon Kowals took his place and brought the telecom system for John's family to speak to him. His wife, Emily, expressed her love and told him to rest after all his efforts, still believing he would be freed. But Brandon could see what she couldn't. John was no longer responsive, and no signs of life had been heard for hours. Ryan had reported John's gurgling breaths earlier, but now there was silence. The rescue team gathered to discuss the situation. A paramedic was sent in to confirm what was suspected. At 11:56 in the evening on Wednesday, November 25th, John Jones was pronounced dead. Despite working tirelessly for 24 hours, rescuers couldn't free John from his inverted position. John had survived an extraordinary 27 hours upside down, 3 times longer than predicted possible. The 6 rescuers who reached John were truly heroic, navigating an unmapped cave section with many risks. They selflessly maintained calm and never gave up on an almost impossible rescue. After determining that recovering John's body was impossible, he was left to rest in the Ed's Push section of Nutty Putty Cave. The cave was permanently sealed with concrete, and a plaque was placed to commemorate John Jones.